As it pertains to K, L in the deep psychology of Carl Jung, the father is more than just a human being. He is a foundational emblem of the inner life. In the same way that our mothers represent our unconscious feelings, instincts, and the primordial womb from whence we sprang, our fathers represent the driving force that draws us into awareness. Law, order, limits, and a sense of moral and spiritual direction are all things he stands for. Our father gives us our first look at the world outside of our mother, the road less traveled, the test that forces us to face our fears and find our true selves, and the bravery to face adversity head-on. Unfortunately, not all children are born with a positive internalized father image. The father was either emotionally distant, physically absent, or subconsciously dreaded by some of his children. Others found him to be silent, unpredictable, or too domineering. This occurs when the father archetype breaks down in the mind of the adult kid, which causes them to lack a solid sense of direction, suffer from crippling feelings of inadequacy, self-doubt, and blocked ambition. If a child grows up without hearing or understanding their father's voice, they may struggle to find purpose in life, or worse, become ensnared by internalized figures of authority they don't know or trust. What remains unconscious, Jung said, will govern our lives as fate. If we avoid facing our own father image, we run the risk of bringing his shadow on everyone we come into contact with, including our bosses, partners, institutions, and even gods. There are several ways we might respond to the lack of approval or permission. We can revolt, submit obsessively, live in silent bitterness, or do neither of these things. These patterns do not emerge from reason alone, but rather from the subconscious terrain of the soul, molded by formative experiences, unmet needs, and generational quiet. Healing requires an introspective examination of one's identity and the questions, what did my father reflect back to me about my place in this world? What part of me still longs for his approval, his word, or his rebuke? This path is not about assigning blame or seeking vengeance, but rather a sacred reckoning. Finding one's inner father again, not as a dictator, but as a supporter of resilience, insight, and grown-up identity, is the central theme. If you or someone you know has ever felt trapped by patterns of betrayal, failure anxiety, or emotional paralysis, this investigation may hold the key to releasing those limitations and embracing your true potential. Many adults, in the recesses of their minds, hold an unspoken bewilderment. They put in a lot of time and effort, but they go nowhere. Despite their hard work and success, they never feel like their life belonged to them. They look for affirmation, acceptance, or a guiding hand that never really came, but they can't seem to get any, and they constantly second-guess themselves. These difficulties mask a more fundamental psychological pattern, a condition of a broken or incomplete bond with the father figure. I am K. L. Jung regarded the parent as an esoteric entity with deep roots in the collective unconscious, rather than just a man or a memory. Structure and discipline, according to his teachings, are the two most important aspects of this archetype that help to bring order out of inner turmoil. Rule of law with clear boundaries and the appeal to individual autonomy. Jung saw the father archetype as someone who helps connect the individual to the larger universe. We move from a state of emotional fusion to one of rational reasoning as this force propels us from reliance to responsibility, from instinct to purpose. Protecting isn't the only thing a father does. He also challenges. Become who you are. Take up your cross. Carve your own path. But what happens when our inner world's traditional father figure is wounded or missing? When the one whose job it was to lay the groundwork for who he would become either didn't show up, showed up in a terrifying fashion, or was too preoccupied with his own ancestral scars to do his job. The impacts are typically subtle and hard to spot, rather than blatant. As a defense mechanism against his fears, a guy may grow excessively stiff. In male-dominated environments, a woman may undermine her self-esteem because she doubts the validity of her own opinions. For adults, the inability to believe they have a right to power, leadership, or achievement can act as an invisible leash around their aspirations. Their mental framework is unsteady not because they lack strength, but because the father's plan is unfinished. According to Jung, a soul's inability to find its bearings in life is the real consequence of the father archetype's distortion or absence, which causes more than just a father wound. Floating in uncertainty, secretly desiring authority, dreading discipline, and feeling adrift without it are all symptoms of a dysfunctional inner parent. Children with this disorder may have difficulty setting limits, making tough choices, or developing their own sense of right and wrong. Rather than actively seeking out meaning, people might just respond to things as they happen, either rejecting or complying to unspoken norms. This is a crisis of faith, not just a mental health issue. If we take the father archetype to its pinnacle, we find that he is more than simply a rule giver and expectant parent. He is a vision giver, a guide who pulls back the curtain and says, "This is who you can become." This inner light helps us face the outside world with confidence, knowing that we are never truly alone. It gives us the confidence to be our own boss and stop wasting time waiting for other people to pick us. The paradox, however, is that if hidden, the very energy that might free up can also bind. When we don't work to recognize and challenge our internalized father image, we end up acting like a puppet. We follow authority figures whose words do not belong to us. We confuse genetic guilt with virtue. Over time, we come to equate outside success with internal harmony, and we find ourselves lost in a world of regulations without a sense of direction. The first step toward recovery is realizing that your father is more than just a man from your past. He is a symbol that is deeply ingrained in your mind and spirit. Meeting him intentionally isn't about reliving past hurt. It's about reclaiming your power within. Dreams, arguments, silence, or abrupt awakenings are all possible ways that this meeting may start, but it will always begin. Just as you have the potential to rewrite your past, you also have the power to recognize that you have been formed by a voice you did not pick. A lot of grown-ups deal with insidious demons, such an irrational dread of authoritative figures, an underlying shame about past mistakes, or an unseen barrier that prevents them from living the life they secretly desire. Most people have never given much thought to the shadow father, an elusive inner character who frequently hides behind this disquiet. Every archetype, according to Jung, has two sides, the sacred and the perverted. The father archetype has both empowering and stifling aspects, as well as a dominating and vanishing one. Rather than being a simple recollection of a troublesome father figure, the shadow father is more of a psychological imprint that rules from the shadows, impacting our views on authority, control, and even our sense of value as individuals. Even though the father was there physically, he was emotionally distant when the child was growing up. He might have been easily irritated, overly concerned with maintaining control, or carrying the weight of his own unresolved pain. Another possibility is that he was completely non-existent, a ghost whose quiet spoke volumes. The result is the same. The kid absorbs an inaccurate view of masculine power, one that disappears rather than stands fast, withholds rather than affirms, or punishes rather than protects. The adult mind is silently shaped by this broken inner parent who influences our views on leadership, success, and even God. Both the magnitude and subtlety of this shadow's effects are considerable. Because he thinks nothing he accomplishes is ever good enough, a man who has an internal tyrant may be too hard on himself. Pursuing an illusory form of validation, he pushes himself to the brink of burnout. When a woman's inner father isn't there, she may have trouble trusting her own judgment and may feel constantly threatened by the environment. To maintain a consistent emotional environment, she may seek out partners who either completely dominate or vanish. They may have trouble trusting themselves and have trouble making judgments because they are afraid of what others will think of them. This shadow within does not yell, it murmurs. Among its many warnings are the following. Who do you think you are to lead? You will fail just like before. You're better off invisible. And most concerning of all, stay small, stay silent, stay safe. If ignored, this voice can eventually rule. It becomes a cocoon around the ego, which can either live in silent acquiescence or stubborn defiance forever. Some people develop a pathological need to constantly improve. Others become aimless souls who can't settle down. To protect themselves from criticism, some people stifle their ambition, while others destroy relationships. In order to free ourselves from the shadow father's tyrannical grip on our minds, Jung cautioned that we must first become aware of its existence. It is not about placing blame on the biological father when we face this darkness. Rather, it is about freeing ourselves from the energy of his unresolved presence. Separating the guy from the symbol or the memory from its meaning is central to the story. It implies taking stock of the suffering, feeling let down, furious, and then deciding not to let it get to you. This is not a picnic. It may even seem like betrayal at times. Torching a once holy temple while standing alone amid a tempest could be a metaphor for how it feels. Amidst the destruction, however, lies something fundamental: your individuality, your principles, and the freedom to live without fear. Even while the shadow father has put you in your place and taught you your limits, he is also your strength's keeper. If you want to take back control of your life and lead from a place of truth rather than fear, you have to face the tyrant or ghost inside. When we reach adulthood, we come to terms with the fact that our greatest adversary is not external, but rather within. This is the inner critic that casts doubt on our ideas, makes us feel bad about ourselves when we're about to succeed, and demands perfection before we even start. A psychic imprint from the past resides beneath this voice, which often assumes the tone of reason or rationality. This figure, which Jung referred to as the internal father, is hardwired into the unconscious system from childhood onwards as a result of exposure to or rejection by the biological father figure. As we become older, this inner father doesn't go away. Rather, he stays. Without scrutiny, he assumes silent control of the inner realm through his words. From a young age on, this inner father is shaped by every rule enforced or boundary disregarded, by every look of approbation or silence of rejection. The youngster starts to form an internal picture of authority, affection, and what it takes to be worthy. The child's voice may grow worried if their father was caring but erratic. If the father was strict, it shows in the tone of the speech. The voice would grow feeble and unsure in his absence. It becomes increasingly difficult to distinguish between our beliefs and this voice's influence as time goes on because of how they merge with the self. We use this internalized father figure as a yardstick to evaluate our own worth and abilities. Are you really good enough? Is a voice that may speak to a guy while he considers taking a risk. Don't get too proud. A woman may feel when she achieves a goal. An artist may be hesitant to share their work, not because they doubt its quality, but because a part of them still worries about being judged. This isn't made up. It's the unconscious framework of who we are, molded by the reverberations of a father figure who was once supremely authoritative in our lives. The internal father's strength lies in the fact that he talks quietly. His conflicts go unnoticed, and no one pays attention to his orders. And yet, there are countless who endure his silent approval, his punishing fury, or their own internal suppression in order to remain in his unseen favor. Even more tragically, some people take on his character traits. They abuse themselves emotionally, work themselves to exhaustion, and demand from their spirits what was unjustly taken from their hearts. However, recovery is achievable. It requires changing the internal father, not ignoring him. The mind is capable of both creating and recreating its own works. There is hope. We will not be doomed to an eternity spent with the critical father. It is possible to start reshaping the image through self-awareness, introspection, and symbolic discourse. We might reframe the father's role from that of critic to that of protector, shifting our perception of him from punisher to steward of our potential. Embrace guidance instead of fear, knowledge instead of guilt, and presence instead of pressure. This is the path back to one's own leadership. Becoming the father figure we may never have had is the holy duty of telling your inner voice, You no longer get to define who I am unless you evolve with me. The kind of father who watches over us and softly tells us that falling is not failure, who corrects us when we mess up but never condemns us, and who encourages us without being pushy. We don't just recover the future in this rebuilt inner relationship. We don't erase the past. Although we acknowledge the father's role, we prefer to modernize it. This is the first step toward living a life driven by truth, maturity, and profound inner freedom rather than by fear or resistance. Midlife is characterized by a specific kind of weariness, not from doing too much as a result of overscheduling one's life to fit someone else's expectations. Constantly trying to fit norms that were never truly your own, constantly seeking approval, and constantly dreading rejection. That is the tiredness. Unresolved inner conflict is often concealed beneath the veneer of accomplishment, duty, or control, but beneath that lays this quiet pain. The person still hasn't broken free of their father complex. This is not about turning one's back on one's biological father, according to Jungian psychology. Rather, it is about breaking free of the subconscious influence of his expectations, voice, and shadow. In its absence, we only arrange our lives in accordance with predetermined scripts passed down through generations. When a child identifies with a father figure and internalizes his values, opinions, and emotional patterns, he develops a father complex. Unchecked, the inner father might transform into a dictator masquerading as a mentor, despite the fact that this complex can take on a more admirable form, such as a desire for self-control, success, or moral clarity. Whether it's attempting to win the father's symbolic favor or resisting his perceived rejection, the adult's life is characterized by reaction. The person is not liberated, but rather kept mentally bound in both scenarios. Numerous shapes might be taken by this subconscious allegiance. Some people shun positions of leadership for fear of seeming too much like their dad. For another, the pressure to prove herself to a man who isn't paying attention could lead to compulsive behavior. Others may be quietly bitter and refuse to accept authoritative figures, only to end themselves back where they started. Jung cautioned that if symbolic separation is not practiced, one risks being stuck in a never-ending cycle of submit and rebellion, never reaching real independence from outside powers. Realization, rather than rejection, is the starting point. When you become aware that the voice you dread disappointing is inside you rather than outside, the process starts. You may be leading a life driven more by need than by genuine desire, and the norms you adhere to are not chosen but absorbed. According to Jung, individuation is the emergence of the independent self, who may then act in accordance with their inner truth rather than externally programmed ideas. You have to go through the ordeal of overcoming the father complex in order to get here. Rather than being a cerebral exercise, this work is profoundly personal, metaphorical, and full of emotion. Saying no without feeling bad about it might be the way to go. It could be like braving the awkwardness of remaining silent. It could include mourning the absent parent or finding forgiveness in the one who made do with little. The point is not to place blame on the parent, but to dispel the notion that your sense of self should revolve around his approval. Something major starts to change as this introspective work progresses. The gravitational center shifts from the exterior to the interior. Now, instead of acting out of defiance or fear, you're acting out of clarity. You're no longer required to justify your existence or offer an explanation for your presence. You enter what Jung referred to as the sacred realm of inner power when you start to lead yourself, not flawlessly, but sincerely. Not leaving home, but the moment you realize you can be completely yourself without anyone else's approval is the real turning point into an adult. This is the place where you can stop being a bystander to your own tale and start writing your own. In this repurposed hub, it is possible to construct an outwardly complete life while internally feeling horribly lost. Even if you have a secure job, a comfortable home, and all the trappings of success, there will always be something missing. When people quietly ask themselves, why, after everything I've done, do I still feel like I'm not enough? in their late 30s or 40s, they're not demonstrating a lack of self-control. Rather, they are reliving an unresolved psychic wound from their father, which has been quietly molding their behavior, self-perception, and emotional depth for a long time. Jung realized that this wound shows itself everywhere in life, not only in the mind, until it is addressed. Anxieties over falling short is the hallmark sign. As if your value were in jeopardy, even the smallest slip-ups seem monumental. An inner tribunal that demands perfection and lacks self-compassion is common among those whose wounds from their fathers have not healed. Fear of disappointing a voice that lingers from infancy follows every risk and every decision. Sometimes this dread motivates people to go above and beyond, rather than paralyze them. Many people chase after titles, status, or outward recognition while climbing ladders they don't even want to be on, all because their inner story. Despite their insistence that they must continuously demonstrate their worth, the pain is reciprocal. Some people experience it as an underlying sense of inadequacy or persistent self-criticism. Some people have a tendency to doubt their gut feelings, overthink situations, or even ruin their chances of success before they even start. They aren't afraid to try new things because they don't have the capacity. Rather, they're afraid of reestablishing a relationship with the inner father who was either absent or critical in the past. How we interact with others in positions of power is frequently impacted by this wound. For some, the very idea of men in authoritative roles evokes subconscious fears of rejection or danger. Not everyone rejects authority figures outright. Others do so because they bring up painful memories of a parent who was overbearing, judgmental, or simply vanished. Jung foretold that the unconscious will transfer its contents onto the outside world. We either find ourselves unable to trust, collaborate, or lead because we replicate the emotional dynamic of our early father relationship in our employers, leaders, or partners, or we reject those dynamics and experience the opposite. An additional barrier to emotional closeness is the wound. A lot of people who deal with it find it hard to be vulnerable or sensitive. Some people may experience discomfort when confronted with their own sensitivity or a sense of disconnection from their feminine side. Because being vulnerable is seen as a sign of weakness, many people, especially men, struggle to find a balance between being emotionally strong and being emotionally present. Some women may try to hide their vulnerability or become too independent because they fear being hurt if they let someone in. As in the past, the vulnerable, open areas of the mind are guarded by the dread of rejection, ridicule, or condemnation in both situations. A devastating symptom is a feeling of worthlessness that does not go away, no matter how hard you try or how successful you seem to others. Many people carry about the subliminal conviction that they are inadequate. They seek affirmation but fail to take it seriously when they receive it. They are loved, but they have a hard time accepting it. They attempt to wind down, but they just can't. This never enough sentiment is not reflective of their actual self, but rather the leftover from a relationship in which love was either not present or was conditional. Until it is acknowledged, experienced, and remedied, it remains the unseen framework of a life constructed in one of a father's elusive approval. Hope, nevertheless, remains. A wound, according to Jung's teachings, is not the final chapter, but rather the first step toward metamorphosis. Reclaiming what was never yours begins with facing the father within, his absence, his voice, and his grief. Instead of wasting time pursuing a man who never acknowledged you, you should focus on becoming someone who can clearly see yourself. The damage inflicted by the father bestows this hidden gift. Embrace the suffering as a catalyst for personal growth. Use it to reimagine what it means to be strong, loved, and valuable, and move on from the wound, drawing knowledge from its lessons. Running away isn't an option at some point in everyone's lives. You may have numbed out the pain, succeeded despite it, or avoided it altogether for decades. Something inevitably rises to the surface, whether it's the agony of it or the desire to pretend it never happened. There will be a moment of total breakdown, an entrancing dream, and a subtle sadness that will sink into your bones. At that point, you come to terms with the fact that your father's influence on your self-perception, social standing, and sense of worth is not limited to your memories, but permeates every aspect of your being. Jung saw the process of healing the father wound as an inner rite, a journey into the metaphorical underworld to confront the father within, not as an eerie ghost to be feared, but as a redeemed component of one's being. The willingness to acknowledge the unspoken, the hurt, the betrayal, the denied longing is the first step in beginning the healing process. Rather than being an accusatory act, this name serves to reveal the truth. Secret silence is one of many unfulfilled wants that adults carry from their childhood. Neither the loss of a father figure nor the right to challenge the authority figures they were compelled to follow were ever emphasized in their education. Healing necessitates ending this period of quiet. It challenges you to see the parent not as an ideal, but as a flawed human being, limited in his abilities, wounded by his own shadow, rather than an idealized figure. When you do this, you break the spell of delusion and start to speak up again. To bring awareness to this process, Jung advocated engaging in inner work. The shadow parent might be brought into conversation through active imagination. Imagine him in that spot, not in his physical form, but as the power he symbolizes in your life. Would you like to know what he says? So what's your response in mind? Just what portion of you still feels awe, submission, or a need to prove him wrong? Through this symbolic exchange, the mind starts to let go of ingrained fears and make room for novel opportunities. Dreams frequently feature the father, who may appear as a stranger, a wounded man, a king, or a judge. You shouldn't ignore these dreams. They're your unconscious trying to get your attention to face something you've buried for a long time. Additional rituals that may be helpful include penning a letter to your father, whether he is alive or not, in which you express what your younger self could never have said, lighting a candle to symbolize your independence from his expectations, and publicly declaring a new inner vow. I lead myself now. These symbolic actions are significant because the unconscious mind responds to meaning rather than performance. These moments signal a shift. They communicate to your spirit, I am ready to grow beyond what I was given. Facing and integrating the shadow parent causes an extraordinary change. You no longer perceive his voice as an adversary. Its metamorphosis starts to permeate your being. The same thing that condemned you before and now confronts you compassionately. What was formerly kept secret now safeguards. Once a source of terror, the shadow parent now serves as the rock upon which you may construct your own sense of power. He now speaks with a wisdom that comes from honoring and releasing the past, rather than the anguish that he carried in the past. The mending process takes time and does not follow a straight path. On some days, you could feel free, while on others, you might feel sucked back into old patterns. Breaking the chain is as simple as choosing awareness over reaction or expression over repression. The inner child who prayed for you to grow up is seeing you through this process. Doing so will do more than simply mend the wound. It will also reshape your relationship with your father, turning him from a symbol of weakness into a source of strength, a gatekeeper into a mentor, and a presence you once feared into one that brings you strength, serenity, and purpose. When the father figure inside is transformed from an emblem of criticism, coercion, or lack of presence into one of confidence, honesty, and purpose, a subtle but profound change takes place. This metamorphosis signifies the start of adulthood for a lot of people, not in the traditional sense of being old and responsible, but in the sense of being psychologically whole. A deep psychological shift occurs with the healing and integration of the father archetype. The need for acceptance and the terror of failing no longer propel the person through life. They quit acting for an afterlife and start living in accordance with their own fundamental truth. The creative will, a force within that does not originate from resentment or retaliation, but from a place of self-aware alignment, emerges during this time, according to Jungian theory. Your ambition and anxiety may have been muddled for a long time. Some people overcompensate in order to feel noticed. while others mistake productivity for self-worth. You might have been afraid to relax, as if you were still attempting to win over a parent who never paid attention to you or disprove his constant doubts. The frenzied energy starts to fade away once the shadow is accepted and the wound is treated with compassion. You start to believe in your own judgment and stop trying to measure up to some abstract ideal. You learn to be strong without becoming rigid, to lead without being dominant, and to create without seeking approval. Not a punisher, but a guardian of your mission. This is the idealized father figure. There is a stillness within the father who has been healed. In times of turmoil, his voice will serve as a source of stability. He doesn't make you prove yourself, but he does tell you to keep that worth in mind. He is a master at knowing when to encourage you, when to let you be, and when to just listen while you grow. The foundation that allows your creative juices to flow is this inner father. He establishes limits not to exert control over you, but to safeguard what is truly important to you. Being present is more powerful than using force, as he points out. Having this skill means you can stand firm without resorting to physical force. Something else starts to awaken with this integration, the ability to act clearly. The world approval of your decisions is no longer necessary. You start to make decisions based on your own internal authority rather than being influenced by outside forces. Your ideals and aspirations are in harmony, and you are free from the shackles of unresolved expectations. Being fearless is not the same as being able to push through it. This is not a state of being pain-free, but rather a determination not to let pain define you. Realization dawns on you. Rejection is not freedom. The maturity that permeates all of your work is a result of your deliberate selection of boundaries that are beneficial to your spirit. You exude purpose rather than a sense of urgency. You bring a balance of firmness and flexibility to your interactions. Humility is a hallmark of your spiritual life, and it's not a sign of weakness, but of completeness. Your inner world takes on the role of a father figure, and you provide a safe haven for the pieces of yourself that were once misplaced. To lead is to live with reverence for the life that has been bestowed upon you, not to gain the approval of others. Above all else, you start to build a life that shows your authentic self, not the one your parents or teachers expected you to be. Emotional and spiritual harmony in your daily life. Incorporating the father into the process looks like this. The key is to shift from a reactive to a creative way of life. You are meant to hold inside you the voice that wounded you, but which has now healed and become your strength. While this isn't the final destination, it is the point at which you will no longer be a wounded child, but rather a free, independent adult with a clear head and a firm grasp on reality. The wound is more than simply a part of your history. It is a pattern etched into your mental blueprint, influencing your navigation of life, your relationship with authority figures, and your sense of yourself in private. The silent heritage of unacknowledged support, affirmation withheld, and presence never given by the Father persists with many, rather than the recollection of his words or deeds. Carl Jung said that coming to terms with your own unexamined inner self is the first step toward being an adult, not reaching a certain age or level of accomplishment. The sacred path toward inner sovereignty begins when you confront the twisted father within, which may be a punishing voice, a shameful silence, or an absence that left you unattached. Closing the father wound isn't about assigning blame. Rather, it's about freeing yourself from the illusion that your value is contingent on what other people think of you. The idea that you can't just show up and expect to be accepted. You have to prove it. Releasing yourself from the unconscious hold of your father on your identity is more important than rejecting him. You regain the power to lead yourself, not out of fear or obligation, but rather purpose and integrity when you confront the shadow father. A subtle uprising of the spirit, this is not. Something inside starts to calm as you incorporate the archetype. You no longer have to choose between wanting approval and being afraid of criticism. You start to experience life with both firmness and gentleness, focus and profundity. You establish yourself as the ultimate authority. Rather than basing your principles on what you were taught, you should let them represent your true self. You lead not to exert control, but to foster creativity. You speak your mind and follow your own North Star. This is the essence of becoming an adult. Presence of consciousness, not lack of wounds, is what matters. It happens when you decide to be the father figure in your own life rather than relying on other people to do it for you. With bravery and tenderness, you emerge from the shadow of another's legacy and into the light of your own, writing your own story. That is the liberation that Jung advocated for, the liberty to exist in accordance with one's true nature rather than one's wound, the liberty to determine one's own destiny. Please share your thoughts in the comments section if you were moved by this message, or if even a single word resonated with your personal experience. Is the sacred road back to oneself still a journey you're on? Or have you met that soul whose presence feels like home? Even if it's unfinished, your narrative has the potential to be someone else's guiding light, the sign they were seeking but didn't realize they had. Also, please share this video with anyone you know who is secretly fighting the false beliefs that love is always painful, that giving up on yourself is necessary for true connection, or that they are not deserving of peace. Assist me in communicating with those who need to know that genuine affection does not necessitate withdrawing from others or giving up one's essence in order to form a bond. A bond with one's own intrinsic truth is the most important one that can be formed. Just one last thing before you go. Subscribe and turn on the bell. Within these walls, we delve into the depths of the human mind, uncovering its latent structure, the unconscious's murmurs, and the ways in which each relationship mirrors our own personal growth. Leave a comment below if you have any questions, themes, or wounds you would like us to address in upcoming videos. Your presence here is like air. Your opinions are not just valued, but crucial. Not only did you show up to this video, but you also showed up to the sacred labor of remembering your true self, to your inner job. Plus, keep in mind that your spirit will recognize, not with terror, but with calm, when the perfect person shows up. Up until then, though, allow the bond you build with yourself remain your closest companion. Therein lies the house and its support system. All things true originate from that state of completeness.